Welcome to Xi Jinping Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: what is COP28? This year's climate conference, explained. Biden may skip COP28. So what's COP28? The 5 things to watch at COP28 in Dubai. The US retains the economic advantage in its rivalry with China. Professor Ben Ansel, Putin and Xi are much bigger threats to democracy than Trump. What is COP28? This year's climate conference, explained. The Globe and Mail. Leaders and diplomats from almost 200 countries will meet in Dubai for the 28th Annual UN Conference of the Parties, COP28, to discuss progress on reducing emissions and plans to limit climate change. COP is the main decision-making body of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. COP28 will include the first formal assessment of countries' progress towards the 2015 Paris Agreement's target to limit the rise in average global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. It is also expected that countries will finalize the Loss and Damage Fund, which would compensate poor countries suffering from climate change events. The fund was agreed to at last year's climate talks, but the details of the fund, including which countries should pay into it and who will have access to it, still need to be finalized. The summit is an opportunity for nations to decide the phase-out of fossil fuels in an adequate time frame. Pope Francis will deliver a speech at the conference, becoming the first pontiff to attend the climate conference. Biden may skip COP28. So what's COP28? Washington Post. President Biden will not be attending COP28, the United Nations Climate Change Conference opening this week in Dubai, according to the White House Week Ahead schedule released on Sunday. Biden, who has regularly attended the summit over the past 2 years, will reportedly be absent from a leaders' meeting taking place on Friday and Saturday, although this has not been confirmed by the White House. Climate envoy John Kerry will be present at the summit, with Kerry being the person who actually negotiates at these summits. The absence of President Biden is unlikely to significantly impact climate policy, although it will impact America's reputation. If Biden does not attend COP28, the U.S. will face criticism from developing countries, although several senior administration officials are still attending the summit. At last year's COP27 talks, countries agreed to end deforestation by 2030 and to cut methane emissions, but these pledges are far from being fulfilled. This year, negotiators are expected to agree on a goal of tripling global renewable energy capacity by 2030. However, it is unclear whether there will be an agreement to phase out fossil fuels, as the United Arab Emirates, which is hosting the summit, may try to block this language. The 5 things to watch at COP28 in Dubai. The Independent. The 28th Conference of the Parties, COP28, to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, is set to take place in Dubai. The conference will feature the first stocktake since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, allowing countries to assess their progress in reducing emissions. However, a recent assessment found that current efforts will lead to a 3 degrees Celsius temperature rise by 2100, far above the target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Transformational shifts are needed to peak greenhouse gas emissions by 2025 and cut them by 43% in the next 6 years. The UAE, the host of the COP28, is facing criticism for its ties to the fossil fuel industry. The country's president, Sultan Al Jaber, who is also the CEO of Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, has promised to move the climate fight from rhetoric to real results. However, there are concerns that the conference will not include a call for a fossil fuel phase-out in its final communiqué. The issue of finance, particularly the $100 billion per year commitment to help developing countries take climate action, is also expected to be a major topic of discussion. The U.S. retains the economic advantage in its rivalry with China. Financial Times. London-based Capital Economics has outlined its analysis of the fractured world economy in 2024, and predicts that the global economy will be reshaped by strained relations between the U.S. and China. Capital Economics argues that countries can be divided into 5 groups: the U.S. and its close allies, countries that lean towards the U.S., the unaligned, those that lean towards China, and China and its close allies. The report suggests that the U.S. bloc will remain dominant in terms of GDP, industrial output and financial activities, but that the China bloc could catch up in terms of industry and agriculture. Professor Ben Ansel, Putin and Xi are much bigger threats to democracy than Trump. Telegraph. The BBC's Reith Lectures, now in their 73rd year, have chosen 46-year-old Professor Ben Ansel as this year's lecturer. Ansel, a political scientist, will explore the theme of our democratic future in his 4 lectures. He does not shy away from courting controversy and questions whether liberal democracy has a future in the age of electoral success for figures such as Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, and Geert Wilders. Ansel does not believe that democracy is in imminent collapse, stating that consolidated democracies are robust and can withstand challenges. However, he does highlight the dangers of complacency and polarization. Ansel emphasizes the importance of citizen engagement in the democratic process and the need to address issues of social fragmentation. Former head of Chinese studies at Nottingham University censored by Chinese Communist Party. Telegraph. Chinese Communist Party officials have attempted to censor British academics in order to increase Beijing's influence in the UK, according to claims made by Professor Steve Sang, former head of Nottingham University's School of Contemporary Chinese Studies. Sang alleges that a university manager was summoned by the Chinese embassy in London and ordered to prevent a Taiwanese politician from speaking on campus. Stephen Morgan, associate provost for planning at the university's Ningbo campus in China, claimed that Chinese officials censored articles and books and encouraged students to spy on their lecturers. America is failing Ukraine. Yahoo! The war in Ukraine may be tipping in the direction that Russian President Vladimir Putin wants, according to Rick Newman writing for Yahoo Finance. Ukraine failed to make significant breakthroughs in its offensive intended to break Russian lines in eastern and southern Ukraine. The arrival of American and European military hardware was also too late to affect the outcome significantly. Ukraine is now in a precarious position, with isolationist Republicans controlling the House of Representatives in the U.S. and scotching $61 billion in additional aid President Biden wants for the country. A slim majority of Americans still support robust U.S. aid for Ukraine, but opposition has grown during the last 6 months. Most Republicans now say the United States is doing too much for Ukraine, while only 44% of independents and 14% of Democrats feel that way. A chief complaint among Ukraine objectors is that President Biden should be focusing more on homegrown problems such as inflation and the influx of undocumented migrants. Can U.S.-China student exchanges survive geopolitics? New York Times. The number of Chinese students in the U.S. has fallen in the past 3 years, and the number of American students in China has plummeted to just 350. Both Beijing and Washington have acknowledged the importance of restoring exchanges, but they have erected obstacles driven by concerns about national security that have derailed other parts of the relationship. For Americans, the appeal of visiting China has dimmed under Xi Jinping, who has stoked anti-foreign sentiment. Chinese propaganda regularly depicts the U.S. as dangerously crime-ridden, and many Chinese are also worried by increased reports of visa denials or border interrogations upon arrival. The U.S. government has prohibited some American students from studying there, and some language learning programs that it funds have moved from mainland China to Taiwan. A reduction in student exchanges could be especially harmful to the future of understanding between the two countries, said Dennis Simon, the former executive vice-chancellor of Duke Kunshan University, a partnership between Duke University and Wuhan University in eastern China. Scholarly collaborations at all levels have been eroded by the geopolitical tensions. American officials have defended Proclamation 10043 as crucial to protecting national security, and said that the number of visas denied or revoked is tiny compared to the greater pool of Chinese students in the U.S. But some politicians have suggested widening bans on Chinese students, and in some polls, a majority of Americans backed limiting Chinese students. By making Chinese students feel unwelcome, the U.S. is hurting one of its historic strengths, said Hung Huang, a prominent media mogul and writer. Washington recognized the importance of increasing the number of Americans to China, launching an initiative to send 100,000 American students to China over 5 years. Recently, foreigners have grown wary of China. China's Ministry of State Security, which oversees its secret police, this summer called for a whole-of-society mobilization against suspected foreign spies. Under Xi, restrictions on academic freedom have threatened to extend to foreign-run campuses in China, with some administrators emphasizing the importance of the Communist Party. These 3 men are vying to lead Taiwan and fend off threats from China. Washington Post. Taiwan's presidential election, set for January 13, 2024, is expected to have far-reaching implications for U.S.-China relations. The Chinese Communist Party has never ruled Taiwan but claims the self-governed island of 23 million as its territory, regularly threatening to take charge by force if Taipei refuses to submit. Experts on Taiwanese politics expect the election race to be one of the most fractured in Taiwan's democratic history. The Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, the party toughest on China, is leading in the polls. Its candidate is Lai Ching-te, who has been vice president since 2020. He claims his party has forged stronger ties with the US, Japan and other democracies and has stood its ground against growing Chinese pressure. The DPP's main rival is the Beijing-friendly Kuomintang, KMT, which wants to resume trade and dialogue with China. Its candidate, Hou Yuih, is a former policeman of 30 years who vows to restore dialogue and strengthen business links with China. The dark horse of the election is Ko Wen-jae, the one-time trauma surgeon and former mayor of Taipei, who has drawn support to his much smaller Taiwan People's Party. Gold bars and Tokyo apartments, how money is flowing out of China. New York Times. Affluent Chinese individuals have moved billions of dollars out of China this year, taking advantage of the easing of COVID restrictions and investing in overseas assets such as apartments, stocks, and insurance policies. The outflow of money reflects concerns about the Chinese economy's recovery, particularly in real estate, as well as unease about the direction of the country under President Xi Jinping. Some Chinese individuals have resorted to creative methods to bypass government controls on transferring money abroad, such as purchasing gold bars and large amounts of foreign currency. Chinese buyers have become the main purchasers of luxury apartments in Tokyo, often paying in cash. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world, here to bring you the latest news and insights. Today, we discuss the upcoming COP28 climate conference in Dubai, the absence of President Biden, the 5 things to watch at COP28, the US-China economic rivalry, the future of democracy, censorship by the Chinese Communist Party, the situation in Ukraine, the decline in US-China student exchanges, the upcoming Taiwan presidential election, and the outflow of money from China. Let's start with COP28, where leaders and diplomats from around the world will gather to discuss progress on reducing emissions and limiting climate change. This year's conference is especially crucial as it will assess countries' progress towards the Paris Agreement's target of limiting global temperature rise. We can expect discussions on the loss and damage fund and the phase-out of fossil fuels. While President Biden will not be attending, climate envoy John Kerry will be present, and the US's absence may impact its reputation. The conference also marks a historic moment as Pope Francis will deliver a speech, making him the first pontiff to attend a climate conference. Moving on to the US-China rivalry, a report predicts that while the US will remain dominant in terms of GDP and financial activities, China could catch up in industry and agriculture. This highlights the strained relations between the two global powers and the impact it will have on the global economy. In terms of democracy, Professor Ben Ansel explores the theme of our democratic future in his Reef lectures. While he believes that consolidated democracies are robust, he warns against complacency and the dangers of polarization. Citizen engagement and addressing social fragmentation are crucial for the future of democracy. The issue of censorship by the Chinese Communist Party is also a concerning development. British academics have claimed that Chinese officials attempted to censor them to increase Beijing's influence in the UK. This highlights the ongoing struggle between academic freedom and Chinese influence. In Ukraine, the situation seems to be tipping in favor of Russian President Putin. Ukraine's offensive failed to make significant breakthroughs, and the US's aid for the country is facing opposition. This poses challenges for Ukraine's future and highlights the shifting dynamics in the region. US-China student exchanges have also been affected by geopolitical tensions. The number of Chinese students in the US has fallen, and many Chinese students feel unwelcome due to increased visa denials and border interrogations. This reduction in exchanges hinders understanding between the two countries and weakens one of the US's historic strengths. Looking ahead to the Taiwan presidential election, the race is expected to be highly fractured and have far-reaching implications for US-China relations. The Democratic Progressive Party, known for its tough stance on China, is leading in the polls, but the Beijing-friendly Kuomintang is a strong rival. The election will be closely watched as it will impact the delicate balance between Taiwan and China. Lastly, we discussed the outflow of money from China, as affluent individuals seek to invest in overseas assets. This reflects concerns about the Chinese economy and unease about the direction of the country under President Xi Jinping. These are just some of the important stories we covered today. The world is constantly evolving, and it's crucial to stay informed and engaged. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you make of these developments? Do you have any questions? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.